As always, we start with the premise of TEA. Now, T stands for, and we are going to only spend just a few minutes on this because most of you have seen this. T stands for thoughts, E stands for emotion, and A stands for actions. And so our actions come from our emotions, and our emotions come from our thoughts. So many times, especially in religious circles, Christian circles, we spend a lot of time focusing on these concept of actions and how to change our actions to, quote, be more like Christ. However, these actions can really only be changed by the emotions and the thoughts changing, because this is what's powering the actions. And so let's just, we hit different verses during different times, different webinars. I just want to grab a couple here. And one of them, of course, we've used Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, fits this particular formula. You're transformed. In other words, your emotional life and actions are changed. You're transformed by renewing your mind. In other words, the thoughts are what is renewed, and then that changes the emotions and the actions. That's how life is transformed. I'll give you a few more verses. However, Colossians, let me go grab it over here. Colossians.
You know, Derek, a great one too with this is, if any of you are kind of wondering where this principle comes from, if you were to go to 2 Corinthians 10, it's around verse 7, but it says, we use our powerful God tools for smashing warped philosophies, tearing down barriers erected against the truth of God. Now here it is, fitting every loose thought and emotion and impulse or action into the structure of a life shaped by Christ.
Yeah, and in the New American Standard, it's in verse 5, we are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. We are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And so what we want to do is really start at the thought life. Another good example of this is in Luke, where Jesus, Paul is not referenced in Luke. Jesus is talking about a tree. And in this tree, he says, that I have no idea how to make a tree here, but you get the gist.
Hey, your trunk of your trees is getting better, but your actual tree, the leaves, is getting kind of worse.
Here we go. And there we'll make our trunk like that. So anyways, what he's saying is the roots of the tree are what causes, so the healthy roots cause the healthy fruits. Another metaphor for what's going on here. The inside of us is what, the inside has to be healthy. And when the inside gets healthy, then it moves us towards healthy emotions and healthy actions. A couple more verses, then we'll get on with it. We do something just a little different each webinar.
Really, that tree looks like a volcano. It's a volcano tree, Derek.
It's an apple volcano tree.
It's an apple volcano tree. Are you going to say somebody's... Don't mute me. No,
Mute her. Mute her.
I'm melting. I'm
Okay.
melting.
All right, Colossians. Somehow we're going to get to Colossians. I've said that 3 times now, and we still haven't done it. All right, Colossians 3, verse 10. It's another verse. And have put on a new self, who is being renewed to the true knowledge, according to the image of the one who created him, a renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek or Jew or slave, etc. So this being renewed to the true knowledge is, again, the renewal process of what we know or what we're thinking. Ephesians 4 is another great verse supporting exactly what we're talking about. And here again, verse 23, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and holiness of truth. So when we're using this word transform or morphed, renewed, changed in the New Testament, we have an enormous amount of evidence that this isn't something that happens from the outside in. You can't behave yourself into goodness. You can't behave yourself into a transformed life. Instead, it goes the other direction. Thoughts create our emotions, and our emotions create our actions. And so those are a few verses for this evening. There's tons of verses like this all over the New Testament. Just grab a few here and there. I got paperwork. Okay. So then what we do is we take time. Again, this is just simply one way of doing this. But one way of taking these thoughts captive is going through what we call the 4 steps. Now, there's nothing magical about the 4 steps. There's 100 different ways of going through this process of taking thoughts captive and moving our thoughts into what's true, and which causes a renewal, a transformation within the life of a Christian. It's the discipleship process. So step 1 is we identify the unhealthy emotion. And the reason we do this is because this gives us our spiritual temperature. The only way we're going to know whether or not we are living in the healthiness of God is to take this spiritual temperature, because in Galatians chapter 5, we see the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. If the fruit of the Spirit, the result of God in us, and in particular most would say, notice how fruit here is not plural. You would think it would say, but the fruits of the Spirit. Fruits meaning, you got all these things. Love, joy, peace, patience. There's more than one, so it should be fruits. Well, it doesn't say fruits because it's not plural. The reason it's not plural is because fruit isn't talking about love, joy, peace, patience as multiple items. What it's talking about is the fruit, meaning Jesus, meaning the one and only God. You could say the oneness of the Trinity. The result, the fruit himself of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. The result of God in us are these things. And so we can quickly identify that if patience or gentleness or any of these other types of things, if they are not there, but instead we have the opposite of those things, which could be things like idolatry, enmities, jealousy, strife, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions. These aren't coming from God. They're coming from the deeds of the flesh. They're coming from something not healthy. And so what we do first is we identify the unhealthy emotion. That way we're able to know the area of our life that needs help. And I think I've mentioned before that when I went in 10 to 15 years ago into my doctor, and I was in tears because my emotional life was a wreck at the time, and I told him that I was actually having physical manifestations of anxiety. I was breaking out I had all kinds of weird things happening to me, breaking out in hives and chest pains, and I had asthma, I couldn't breathe, and all the things that come with panic attack kind of things. And my doctor told me at that point how important it was to have these symptoms of anxiety. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, because if you don't have those symptoms, then you don't know that you're unhealthy. And so that's what we're doing here, is we're identifying the unhealthy emotion. So what we want to do, and we just kind of go through this process each week, but in particular, the important thing here isn't to go through this process for one person's issue, but instead just throw out unhealthy emotions. You can start doing that right now as I'm talking. Those of you that are on the webinar, just type in an unhealthy emotion that you've experienced in the last couple weeks, and we'll use that as our starting point. And as you send those into Brent, Brent will read those to me. Again, this is just about you typing in any unhealthy emotion that you've experienced over the last couple weeks, and then I'm just going to write them up here on the board. Of course, we're not going to put your name beside them or anything like that. We're just going to list them, and so we'll come up with that.
First one we got is anger.
Anger. So number 1 is anger. Let's get 3 or 4 or 5 up here. What'd you say, Brent?
Here's the first 4: anger, hate, lust, regret.
Anger, hate, lust, regret.
Does this tie into the final 4 at all? I mean, what happened
with Butler?
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder.
I'm not sure about the lust, but maybe the anger and regret might. Okay, so then the next thing we do is we identify. Now remember, where do our emotions come from? Our emotions come from our thoughts. So if we have an unhealthy emotion of anger, hate, lust, or regret, then we know that there's got to be a thought behind these emotions. And so what we want to do is, just like Brent mentioned in 2 Corinthians 10:5, says we are taking every thought captive. What we want to do here is, if I drop my pen, what we want to do here is we want to take the thought captive that's causing us to feel these things. Okay, so here we go. Do the same kind of thing. You can respond to any of these.
Hey, Derek, add one more to that. We had a number 5 come in, and it was overwhelmed. I think that's a big one that we all can relate to, so I wanted to just kind of give you that one.
Okay, good. So what I want you to do now is I want you to type in, I want you to identify the excuse me.
The thought.
I just want you to identify the thought. So, very, very simply, and actually it doesn't matter who responds to what. So when you type it in, what I want you to do is I want you to type in the emotion. You can just type in the word hate and then put a dash beside it and then say, here's the thought. Type in the word lust, put a dash beside it and say, here's the thought. It can be any thought. And frankly, we're doing this to practice the renewal process of transforming our lives by renewing our minds to the truth of God. So for instance, if you typed in hate, you don't even have to put the thought for hate. You can type in regret and say, well, here's a thought for regret. It can be any thought that relates to these emotions. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't worry about me, saying, hey, Tom or Bill or whoever asked this question, because I'll make sure you're anonymous, unless you really say, you want to have a chance maybe to speak or something, and then we'll know who you are. But if not, you'll be anonymous. So.
Yeah. So
and anybody can chime in, because we've all had these emotions.
Right. And so, yeah, just any thought that has caused you any of these emotions, just type it into the little chat box, and I'll write it up here on the board.
Okay, hate. First one that came in was that, and here's what he said.
Okay.
This person rubs me the wrong way. They drive me crazy.
Okay. This person
Jenny.
rubs me the wrong way.
The wrong way. Drives me crazy.
Wrong way and drives me crazy. Okay, very good. Let's do another one. It's perfect, by the way.
Keep them coming, guys. Okay, anger. This person does respect my authority. I wonder if that's supposed to be does or does not. Does not. There we go. Thank you for clarifying. This person does not respect my authority, and it makes me angry.
Okay, I'm going to say he does not respect my authority. It could be she. It absolutely doesn't matter when we're going through these. Let's do another couple, please.
How about there we go. Let's see. This one would be regret and feel I've missed things in the past.
I have missed things in the past.
And for lust, we have I really connect with this person and find them attractive.
Okay.
See how that one ends up being lust, because I'm thinking, well, that could be just a human response. Okay, overwhelmed, I can't get it all done.
Okay. Very good. That's what we'll work with tonight. Now, the important thing, up to this point anyways, is we have identified the unhealthy emotion. We've identified the thought. Step 4 is to think on what is true. So once we work out what is true, then we spend time focusing on thinking about what it is that is true. Step 3 is identifying what's true. Now, how can I say, whoops, totally screwed that up. I think that a little eraser's funny looking on that.
It is.
Okay, so identify what's true. So here's the thing. How can we say identify what's true? Well, it's because we can say these thoughts aren't true. They're lies. How can we possibly say that? Well, because if I'm thinking something that's making me feel hate, is it possible for this thought to be coming from God?
No.
Yeah.
Not according to Galatians 5.
Not according to Galatians 5, because he says the fruit of the Spirit is the deed, it's the deeds of the flesh that cause us to feel hate, not the fruit of the Spirit. So that's why we know this thought cannot be based on God's truth. It has to be based on a lie. So that's why we can then say, when we identify this thought, by definition, it has to be a lie. So our goal now is to work the lie into what's true, and that's what we'll do right now. But we're going to go back to the Lives Transforming site. Sorry about that. Close that up. And go back to the Lives Transforming site. We're going to open up the worksheets. We're going to spend not very much time on this. And the reason is because if I remember right, last week we spent quite a bit of time on this worksheet. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it again. I want to kind of change things up. But here's examples of these little distortions that we buy into. And can you see this on your screen well enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's enlarged enough.
Okay, so I'm going to read down through them real quick. Never and always, should deception, tunnel vision, good doesn't count, all or nothing, mind reading, predicting the future, playing down, playing up, emotional deception, blaming myself, blaming others, name calling. These are all little lies that we buy into, deceptions that we buy into. Now again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I'm not going to read through each one of them because you can download these right off the internet if you want them. However, what I would like to do is just notice some of these lies, these distortions that I'm showing here on the screen inside some of these thoughts that we have noted on the chart. So, for instance, let's just do number 1. Here's a thought that says, he does not respect my authority. So what distortion would that play into of the ones that I just read?
Did you read, well, it would be the should. The
Yes.
implication is they should respect my authority.
Yeah. And so what's really happening here is he does not respect my authority, and he should respect me.
And boy, Derek, that's perfect too, because we know that anger is always connected to a should statement.
Yeah. Not always, but certainly many, many times. You're exactly right, Brent, that these should statements that we have, and this is kind of what we call a hidden should statement, because he does not respect my authority or she does not respect my authority. Either one, doesn't matter. She does not respect my authority is hidden inside this statement is inherently something that says this person should respect me. And so these worksheets that I have here are just guides. They help. You go through these 4 steps on your own when you're not in a webinar. So let's do another one. Let's do number 5. We'll take on some of the ones that are more obvious first, and then we can go into the other ones. Here's overwhelmed. I cannot get it all done. Let's see. What would that be?
I think it fits a couple. I mean, the implied is I will never get it all done.
Okay.
Never and always.
Okay, so it could be going as far as never, but
And an all or nothing.
and it definitely is this all or nothing. In fact, the word all is right here. I cannot get it all done. Okay? And the deception is that somehow, unless you do get it all done, then it's not good enough. Here's an example. Unless my appearance or work is flawless, then it's no good at all. Unless I can get everything done I want to get done, then it's not good enough. It's not good at all, maybe. Okay.
I'm not okay if I don't get it all done.
Okay, so
whatever way.
Right. All right, so now let's look at another one here. Let's look at regret. I've missed things in the past. Do you see anything here?
I think it's the covert should again. The statement is, I shouldn't have missed things in the past.
Or I should have done something in the past different than I did. Okay. So this definitely could be, I should have done it differently.
I also wonder about tunnel vision a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because the implication is if I've missed things in the past, then there's no recovering.
Yep, that's right. And you'll notice that a lot of these thoughts that we have, they have multiple distortions buried in them. Okay? As we come down here, I have missed things in the past. Could be, depending on the situation, this kind of playing down deception. In other words, for instance, and we don't know who this is or exactly what the situation is, and that's not the point, but the point is that if I've missed things in the past, then I play down all the good things, and then I play up all the bad things. So in other words, the regret is that I can think of things that are bad, even though there were plenty of good things. And a good example of this would be a situation of a divorce, for instance. We have a tendency, if we get divorced, to think about the bad things and forget about the fact that if you were married for 10 years and you did have bad times, there were 7 years, 8 years, or months, or weeks, or whatever, that there were actually good things. But the enemy doesn't want you to think about those good things. He doesn't want you to think about that. He wants you to totally play down the good things and totally play up the bad things. All right? And of course, regret could be part of this whole blaming myself deception. Okay, like you mentioned, Brent, the lust decision, or the lust statement here, I really connect and find this person attractive. Well, that in and of itself is a thought that doesn't necessarily appear to be something that would be a lustful thought. However, if you're married and this person that you are really connecting with and finding attractive is someone you're not married to, all of a sudden it takes on a different connotation. And in this regard, could fit into a number of these. The last one we'll talk about here is the hate. This person rubs me the wrong way, and what's the deception there?
And they shouldn't.
Yeah. So you have this,
drive me crazy.
right, you have this should thing going on again. Now, I'll just make a quick observation that I find that these should statements are one of the most, at least my observation is that they're one of the most prevalent distortions that we buy into, especially as Christians, is that we have got in our minds that, we've got in our minds what we believe is right and wrong, which there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But then we decide that all of a sudden other people should be doing it differently. I should be better than I am. And then the blame game, the blaming others, the blaming me, the shooting on others, the shooting on yourself, all this stuff, it just creates an absolute nightmare. And a lot of it does come from just pure judgment of other people and yourself, and it really can bind you up. And so, anyways, this would be a very, we've talked about should statements in the past a little bit, but you can see the thread of them. You can see the thread of the should statement in number 1 and number 2, possibly even number 4, buried in and around all these emotions.
Hey, Derek, another variation that I've seen a lot recently, and I do myself, is the must statement. I must do this. I must do that. You
Yeah.
see that with the overwhelmed one there too.
Right. I have to.
Closely related.
Yeah. I must. Okay. I would like to expand on that just a little bit from a and see what happens. And I've mentioned this to Brent and to Lisa earlier, but I came across a quote this week, and I'm going to write it down here. And here's the quote. I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. Now, let me show you what a thought like that does over here. She doesn't respect me. If you think about that thought in light of this thought, something starts to change. Because you see, if somebody doesn't respect me, then that must mean maybe there's something wrong with me, and certainly something wrong with her or him, and certainly I deserve to be made something, have some respect. I think you see where I'm getting. Or how about I have to and I must and I can't get it all done. But here's the thing. I have to get it all done. Why do I have to get it all done? Because I need to make something of myself. I need to be able to show that I'm good enough. I need to be able to live up to some standard. Regret. I've missed things in the past. And I have to regret those things. Why? Because again, there's this thing that I wanted to live up to. There's this life that I somehow wanted to be something. And it drives us crazy. Lust.
I had to give up my dreams. A lot of people think about that.
Lust is especially physically attractive lust. See, if I have someone in my life that I'm physically attracted to, then that does what? It kind of resonates in me that I'm making something of myself. There's meaning there. This person rubs me the wrong way, drives me crazy. She shouldn't be doing that. Not to somebody like me, because I'm something, and they shouldn't be treating something like me, somebody like me, like this. But what if we believed this thought? I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. Now this really hit me, because for me, I have a tendency to get my worth and value as a person from my performance. Some of us have a tendency to get their worth and value from other people's opinions. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to repeat the quote and instead say, I must completely abandon any attempt to make someone, whoops, sorry about that. Get someone to like me. Now, these two thoughts are what I would consider to be, and I think you might agree, highly radical. These are thoughts that at first glimpse, could be doing one of two things to you right now. One of them, they may do what they did to me. They may bring tears to your eyes. When I first read, I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself, I had an emotional reaction to that, which was tears. And this is not an uncommon phenomenon of these particular lines. I facilitated a group today, and a pastor, when he read, I must completely abandon any attempt to try and get someone to like me, just started crying. That would be one response. Another just as valid response would be a response that says something like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I can't even imagine those thoughts making any sense at all. And it might give you a visceral response of complete, almost, I want to shut the webinar off. And if you're having that kind of response, I'm just suggesting that I wouldn't think that would be uncommon. However, imagine for a second the need, the freedom that might be gained if there was no need for someone to like you or respect you, for you to feel okay about you. What would happen to this anger and this hate? Imagine what it would be like for the freedom of you thinking a thought something like this. I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. What freedom might come to your life when you're feeling like number 5 and you're thinking, I can't get it all done. Imagine the freedom, Derek Mattinger, that would come to your must and have to statements if you happen to think this thought right here on top. Now, I don't know what's happening out there because I can't hear all of the people that are on the line right now. But I can say that I want to give you a little more history on this particular phrase. There was a guy who was a Christian in Germany during Hitler's reign. And this Christian guy knew what Hitler was doing, and he wanted to stop him. And he attempted to have Hitler assassinated, and he failed. And so, of course, the Nazi regime imprisoned him. And unfortunately, 3 days before, the Allied troops invaded that prison and would have released him, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hanged by the Nazis. However, in one of his letters from prison, he wrote, I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. You can imagine what he was thinking in prison. But can you imagine inside a real prison how much freedom this particular thought gave Dietrich Bonhoeffer, knowing that he was going to die, he was going to get hanged, knowing that his life was about to end, and yet seeing here in this statement that total absolute freedom that comes. So let's check it out. If you thought, I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself, Derek Mattinger, does the I must statement lose its impact or increase its impact on you?
I mean, that I must goes away.
I must. It not only loses its impact, it totally goes away, doesn't it? The I have to totally goes away. You live in 100% freedom from the shame and guilt that comes from the I must, I have to, and I should statements, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
This particular truth is one of those truths that is, of course, not out of the Bible, but, of course, is out of the Bible. It's a quote from Bonhoeffer in the early 1900s. But we can think of these. Go ahead.
It's how Christ lived.
It is how Christ lived. And we hear these verses come and ring in our heads, don't we? Of dying to ourself daily. You know, do you realize how hard it would be to live a life of dying to yourself and trying to make something of yourself at the same time? You can't do that. You can't die to yourself and make something of yourself at the same time. They're the opposite of each other.
You know, Derek, when I see these statements up here, I think, you know, when I'm guilty of the opposite of these, trying to make something of myself or trying to get someone else to like me,
Yeah.
it's based on an external pressure.
Yeah.
And it's me not being me. It's me trying to be someone else.
Yeah, kind of forgetting who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so what happens is we want to desperately take over. And yet what God is saying, in even a much deeper way, as we've talked many times before, 1 Thessalonians 5, okay, doesn't like that. That we have a spirit, soul, and we have a body. We have a body, we have a soul or a mind. This is the soul. And we have a spirit. What God is doing here, though, is something much deeper. He's saying, when you get saved, the God of the universe comes into your life. This old spirit's dead. The real you, I come in and live. This is the eternal you. This is the part that lives forever. And you take on my righteousness. It's imputed into you. You have me in you, God says. Now, think about understanding our salvation from the perspective of the Holy Spirit living in us, making us who we are, identifying ourselves completely, not with whether people like us or not with how well we perform, but instead identifying ourselves. Let me grab the verse here. Here it is. But Christ's life showed me how and enabled me to do it. I identified myself completely with him, with Christ. What happens in the moment where I identify my value and worth completely with him? Now what I want you to do is think for just a second of how ridiculous this sounds if I say, I've completely identified my worth and value with Christ. He in me is what makes me valuable, worthy. It makes me something, makes me somebody, completes me totally. Okay? Now, take that thought and add this one next to it. I want to make something of myself.
Sounds
Yeah, you're already the best you're going to be.
That's exactly right.
See,
It's impossible to make more out of yourself if you are already complete.
Exactly. I want to make something of myself is the most counter concept to salvation there is. It's like, it's almost like this. It's like God is saying this. You asked me to come into your life. I came into your life. I made you completely righteous. So righteous that you don't need to go around performing your way into feeling better. Which means that if you don't perform good enough, you don't have to feel shame anymore. You're free to perform at your best without feeling strife and stress anymore. I came into you to complete you and to make you something. But you get up in the morning, Derek. Now I'm talking to myself. You get up in the morning and you think you have to make something of yourself, and then you walk back into the strife of feeling like you have to get it all done. You walk back into the hatred of needing somebody to respect you to make yourself feel better when you're already good enough. I've already made you somebody. Now you are trying to make yourself somebody when I've already made you somebody. It doesn't work.
It's a form of idolatry.
It's a form of us trying to do something we can't do. It's impossible for us to do. So now we have a glimpse of what Bonhoeffer really meant. I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. I'm already something. And when I try to make myself something by trying to get people to respect me, by trying to get people to treat me in a way that doesn't drive me crazy, by trying to feel better about myself because somebody's attractive, and if they're attractive to, if I find them attractive and they like me back, that must mean I'm something. Or I have to regret the fact that I wasn't something more a year ago, 5 years ago. Or live in an overwhelming feeling that somehow I have to be something more than I am to get it all done because I must do it or I have to do it in order to be something. And God is saying, you already are something. That's the whole point. In fact, let me make it emphatically clear, he says. Is it not clear to you that that old rule keeping, in other words, performing yourself into something, or peer pleasing, in other words, having other people like you in order for you to be something, would be an abandonment of everything personal and free in your relationship with God. Now, think about this. Paul is so strongly stating this. He is saying, for you to try to make something of yourself by performing yourself, getting it all done, must do it, have to do it to feel better about yourself, or peer pleasing, getting other people to respect you, like you, treat you better, to make yourself feel like you're something, is an abandonment of everything personal and free in your relationship with God. You would be in that moment repudiating God's grace. What's he mean by that? What he means is in that moment that you live in that lie, that you have to make something of yourself, is the moment that you've repudiated everything he's done. In other words, you've negated the fact that God came in you. Now, you didn't stop him from coming in you. He's still in you. You didn't lose your salvation. Don't go there. What I'm saying is you're totally, completely righteous, but you're acting as if you're not. And so you go and try to find it somewhere else. And Paul says, that's repudiating God's grace. He goes, I'm not going to do that. He goes, I refuse to do that. And finally, he says, if a living relationship with God could come by rule keeping, and we'll say peer pleasing too, because that's what he said up here. If a living relationship with God could come by me trying to make something of myself, then there was absolutely no reason for Christ to die. He died unnecessarily. There was no use.
Yeah, you almost have to let that really settle in.
man, how often every day, I find myself forgetting it. As much as I'm even in this message of lives transforming and the transformational thinking, it's so many days I try to find my worth or value from something else and forget I got it all already.
Yeah. And yet we buy into a lie. We buy into these lies. But these truths totally annihilate these lies. Now look, this is what I love about it. We're going to connect the dots here. Because when we buy into what's true, then we live in everything that's personal and free in your relationship with God. And so from a very practical standpoint, can you imagine what it would be like to be free of the anger that comes with thinking that someone should respect you more, to make you something? How awesome would it be to be free of all these things? Because we say, I'm going to completely abandon any attempt to try to get someone to like me, respect me, or completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. Now I will get personal with you. This is the one that's hardest for me. I must completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself. Things like fame, things like popularity have never been anything that's been of interest to me. And to the extent they were, it's certainly been so many decades ago, I was a kid or something like that, that I've ever thought of it. But let's go real practical. Let's say, for instance, I come home and I sit down, and remember, I'm talking about it from a performance perspective. Let's say that I come home and I sit down and I start to read a book. And let's say I start to read the Bible. And I start reading it and I'm very focused. Why am I doing that? I catch myself sometimes reading the Bible because I want to have an influence. I want to be able to communicate these truths in a way that can help people. All that sounds just fine, doesn't it? There's nothing wrong with those motives. It doesn't seem like, until the enemy takes it one step further and says, and if you don't, Derek, read your Bible, if you don't study enough, then you may not have the impact. And if you don't have the impact on people's lives, then you know what, Derek? You really won't really be somebody. You won't be making something of yourself. You really won't. You really won't be living up. And you know what? You need to make something of yourself. And so what happens in real life is I read more. Now, hang with me through the story, because I read more. And then my son comes up to me and he says, Dad, can we go out and play horse on the basketball court? And I say, son, I'd love to play horse, but look, I'm reading. Why? To have an influence, because I need to make something of myself. I need to have an impact. Do you see how slippery the enemy is? That's the power of these truths. But when I completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself, I sit down and I read the Bible. I study with no stress of having to study, with the total freedom to get up off the chair and go play horse with my son, to be able to live a life free of the tyranny of even a Bible, free to live life without that strife, that stress, the overwhelming feeling, the anger that comes from not knowing enough, or any of these other feelings that can come from that kind of situation.
Hey, Derek.
Yeah.
Can you pull up, while we're on that, just real quick, can you pull up 1 Peter 4:1 out of the Message?
Okay, since Jesus went through everything you're going through and more, learn to think like him. Think of your sufferings as a weaning from that old sinful habit of expecting to get your way. Then you'll be able to live out your days free to pursue what God wants instead of being tyrannized by what you want. What an incredible way that Peter has explained what Bonhoeffer is talking about here. See, when I completely abandon any attempt to make something of myself, I am free to pursue what God wants instead of being tyrannized by what I want. When I completely abandon any attempt to try to get someone to like me, what does that look like? I want to pull up Galatians in the Message. We're going to go to chapter 5. Hold on, I got to find the verse just a second.
Is it 6:5?
Oh, is it in chapter 6?
Might be. About comparing?
Hold on, let me grab my message and I'll grab it real quick. It's in chapter 6. It's just towards the end. Okay. For my part, I'm going to boast about nothing but the cross. Because of that cross, I've been crucified in relationship to this world. Now remember what we just said here. I must completely abandon any attempt to try to get someone to like me. In other words, what we're saying here is to get someone to like me in order for me to feel like I'm somebody or something. But because of that cross, I've been crucified in relation to the world. In other words, I'm dead to it. I don't need people to like me to feel better about myself. And look at this. Set free now. Set free from the stifling atmosphere of pleasing others and fitting into the little patterns that they dictate. Can you imagine that kind of freedom? That's the kind of freedom that this God of the universe in us that we talked about gives us when we lean into what is true, completely abandoning any attempt to make something of ourselves or to try to get someone to like us. We're free. We're free from that stifling atmosphere of pleasing others, having others manipulate us to fit into the patterns that they dictate in order to try to get them to like me because I somehow want to be somebody. I somehow want to make something of myself. Well, we're about ready to finish the webinar. And I know tonight has been one of those nights that has been a little deeper than normal. These truths run really deep. And for some of you, they may be doing what they did for me, which is they about knocked me off my chair when I first started thinking through the impact of these truths. For some of you, they may seem very confusing at this point and very different, and the dots aren't connecting, and that's totally okay. But what I want to do now, as we finish up, is just spend a few minutes with Brent and Lisa and Derek, just getting your feedback on kind of what was revealed specifically to you as we were talking about these things. Now, many of you have been on these webinars before, and we've gone very different directions, and tonight we went in a very different direction than we have before, and it won't look like this in the future webinars. But tonight, these true statements were so powerful that I felt like that they needed to be shared. So we'll kind of go around the panelists very quickly, and then we'll kind of wrap things up tonight. Brent, are there any questions or comments from anybody that have sent anything in that we need to respond to?
Yeah, I've kind of just been answering them on the side. Nothing that asks, hey, can we talk about this? But some really great insights. Just, again, one person talked about, the feeling overwhelmed. One of the things they've learned how to do is not look at all the things that are overwhelming them. Just take one thing at a time and break it down and approach it and see it, take the fear out of it.
Right. One of the things I will review is we identified an unhealthy emotion. We then identified these lies right here. Now, sometimes we can identify a truth that hits these exact lies, and we've done that often, and we will continue to do that, Tonight we did something a little different. We came up with some general truths that hit hard against many, many lies. That's step 3. Step 4, think on what is true. I can promise you, I have this thought in my wallet, on my desktop, every day as I continue to allow this truth to settle into my life. That's step 4. If we don't think upon that truth, then these verses that we talked about at the beginning in Colossians, these verses that we talked about in the beginning, like Romans 12:2 and Colossians 3 and Ephesians 4, the renewing is where the transformation comes from, but the renewing has to be on God's truth. Okay, Lisa, we'll start with you, and all we're doing is just we're saying, okay, what's God doing in you? What was revealed to you tonight? Share with us what's going on in and around God speaking with you, and then we'll go on to Derek and then Brent, and we'll finish up.
Sure. I started thinking about this specific quote yesterday when I saw it for the first time, and tonight as we were processing it, when I heard it for the first time, I thought, wow, there's something really powerful there. And then as it settled in a little deeper, I think it's that paradoxical reaction. On the one hand, I see the freedom that would come from believing that, and at the same time, there's kind of a grief experience of recognizing that this is a daily dying to self. And that process of death does bring freedom in life, but there is still death in that because the filter in my mind is so set around, my stuff of making something of myself or getting my worth from somewhere else. And so it leaves me a little quiet, which is unusual for me. And
yes, it is.
That's a that's a good thing. A good thing.
I will just simply add to that tonight, although it's not, every webinar won't be like this, tonight was a webinar that we kind of went into some deep waters. Other webinars, we will not go so deep, but in light of what you're saying, I think that's what you're saying. I mean, we're kind of in some deep waters here, and it just takes a little time of reflection. Derek Madinger, what are your thoughts?
I've studied some Bonhoeffer, and I've seen that quote before, but when you flipped it to the other people's opinions, it set me quiet too, if you will. Like this, I've never seen it quite that way. And that's something I need to post on my bathroom mirror every morning.
Yeah.
The thought that came to mind as we're going through that is rereading Romans with this mindset through this filter. And it's totally different, especially like chapter 5, 6, and 7, where we're talking about, faith and being dead to sin and being freed from the law and freed from sin. And that just nails it right there.
Yeah.
It's such powerful stuff.
Brent, what do you have to add?
I'm just going back to a small group we did months ago. We talked about taking and giving. And when I'm trying to make something of myself or get others' good opinions, I'm really trying to get what I want. And like the 1 Peter 4:1, I get tyrannized because of that.
Yeah.
And I'm tyrannized because I forget I'm already complete. And so whenever I'm taking from someone, it's constantly creating an unhealthy emotion in me and a neediness. But when I find myself giving, not needing to be someone, but giving all of myself, there was a passage in, I believe it was in Philippians, that talked about that because of Christ's obedience, that God lifted him high. He honored him above all things in anything, ever. And so it just kind of, and when I live that kind of a life where I'm giving and out of obedience, then the fruit, like we talked about, the fruit of the Spirit, love and peace and patience and joy, it begins to come up. And so it's like as I begin to die to that thing, like Bonhoeffer said, I have to try to make something of myself or get someone to like me when I can live on the opposite way. And it's almost like trying to not make something out of someone else, but exalt them, to give to them. It just changes everything. It may never even change them, but it changes me because then I get to experience the fruit of the Spirit.
Exactly. A comment. I I sent this quote to a couple people this week. I talked to Brent about it, Lisa about it, and I sent it to one other person. And it was Cheryl Fuller, who's not on the, she's not on the webinar tonight, but Cheryl's been part of Lives Transforming for a long time. Cheryl's an older lady and one of the wisest ladies that I know. And I sent this quote to her, and she wrote back, I think that quote is a little too holy to respond to right now. And I think that probably sums up exactly the power of this particular truth that relates so closely to the biblical concept of dying to self.
Yeah.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for people, just a person like Bonhoeffer, who you spoke into, and he has spoken into us tonight. But ultimately, it was not him, it was you speaking directly through him. Thank you for your truth, your scripture, your word, the paradoxes, the holiness of your truth that changes our lives. We can't change ourselves, but you, through your truth, revealed to us in these moments, can change everything, transform us from the inside out. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Thanks, guys.
Amen.
Thanks for all the questions, all the input. Very helpful. Thanks again, of course, Lisa, Derek, Brent, for your help tonight. I'll try to get all this saved and uploaded on the internet over the next couple days. Brent, any other comments or questions that we need to respond to?
No, man, I'm just sitting here I was looking at a verse as you were praying, and here's what it says. There has never been the slightest doubt in my mind that the God who started this great work in you would keep it and bring it to a flourishing finish on the very day of Jesus Christ appears. So, guys, you have what it takes because God's in you.
Yeah, absolutely.